In this edition of In My View, I intend to talk about the ongoing protests in Hong Kong, which have occupied a lot of media interest practically all across the world and have some very interesting perspectives in terms of how is China evolving as far as this part of the 21st century is concerned. The protests are interesting for a number of reasons, quite significant amongst which is this general overall across the world sense that we are in the thrall of authoritarian leaders practically all across the world. Especially in the more important countries, be it in the United States, be it in Turkey, be it in India, be it in Philippines, be it in China, in practically all countries, power is exercised by men who have an outsized idea of how significant they are as far as affairs of mankind are concerned. And it's in the light of this that one needs to examine as to what exactly is going on as far as this region called as Hong Kong is concerned. The protests began in the month of June 2019 and are about a certain bill which the Hong Kong government intends to pilot through the Hong Kong Legislative Council, which aims to extradite people from the territory of Hong Kong, from what is called a special administrative region of Hong Kong, who have committed crimes to countries and regions with which the Hong Kong SAR as of now doesn't have any extradition arrangements. What has been particularly galling as far as the protesters are concerned is the fact that one of the regions to which people would be extradited would be the Chinese mainland itself, which a lot of Hong Kongers find infringement of their basic freedoms as they have been enjoying since 1997 under the Basic Law, when Hong Kong was turned over to the Chinese by the United Kingdom. To begin with, in as brief a nutshell as is possible, for quite some period of time, there was, as far as the later part of the 20th century is concerned, this discussion that 1997 edges closer and would be the year in which Hong Kong will have to be handed over to the Chinese, to the People's Republic of China by the United Kingdom, as British sovereignty over the territory comes to a close. For the best part of the 19th and the 20th century, when the British governed Hong Kong ever since the 1840s, when Hong Kong was acquired as part of treaty arrangements with the Chinese Empire, as a consequence of the Opium Wars, it was a small territory with a couple of islands, mostly reliant on fishing, piracy, cultivation of paddy, and so on and so forth. The lease was for a substantive period of time till almost 1997, when it was decided that this territory would be handed over back to the Chinese government. In the interregnum, the Chinese Empire collapsed, the Chinese Republic collapsed, and the People's Republic of China coming into play in 1949. For a major part of this period when the British governed Hong Kong, the British had this idea that the Hong Kongers are sort of a fifth column for the Chinese Republic. So you have incidences taking place in the 1950s and the 1960s when the British barely watched over the Hong Kongers as a people who, on account of their ethnicity, possibly had a tendency to side with the Chinese government in a bid to stir trouble in British-ruled Hong Kong. So, for a significant part of the 20th century, Hong Kongers did not enjoy the sort of freedoms that they're presently clamoring for in their streets. Most of these freedoms were legislated in the 1980s and in the 1990s, especially as the date for withdrawal started drawing closer. So this whole idea that there would be something called as rule of law, there would be a separation of powers, there would be an independent judiciary, there would be free speech, a free press. Well, these were things which evolved. These were things which were not always in existence. And for the best part of the 20th century, as these things kept on evolving, the British also had a certain sort of idea that maybe these things are going to be used by the Hong Kongers against the British. It's only in 1997 when the Basic Law becomes the basic premise around which the handover was translated into reality. So the idea was that Hong Kong would maintain a separate system, separate currency, separate judicial system, separate legislative arrangement, and all a sort of charter of freedoms which every Hong Konger would enjoy till almost 2047. That's almost 50 years after the territory was handed over to the British, but by the British to the Chinese. The Chinese government accepted this for a simple reason, because gaining Hong Kong was pretty significant for it on account of Hong Kong's stature as an international financial center. The present disparity is quite strange. So, for example, Hong Kong is home to 7.5 million people. China is home to almost 1.3 billion people. But when it comes to the per capita income, Hong Kongers are fairly rich when one starts comparing them with the mainland Chinese. So per capita incomes in Hong Kong are in the range of $64,000 per year, whereas if you're looking at China, one is looking at $16,000 per year. Hong Kong is a fairly developed territory. It's a major center as far as international finance and financial activities in the Asia-Pacific region are concerned. As compared to that, China is a middle-income country, which is trying to move on, but nevertheless is going to take a lot of time to catch up with the sort of prosperity that Hong Kong has. So China intended to absorb Hong Kong as a region which would rival the influence of Singapore, of Taiwan, as far as economic activities in the Asia-Pacific region are concerned. As the Chinese government was not much loath to this idea of the basic law and almost gave in. The one thing that one has to remember is the Hong Kong handover came almost 9 years after Tiananmen Square had happened, and there was an obvious apprehension that most of these laws need to be defended for a simple reason, because if one didn't stand up for them, there's quite a possibility that you would end up on the wrong side of things, as had happened at Tiananmen in June 1989. So with that in mind, China retained the laws. China accepted the basic law, agreed to operate by its rules, by its regulations, both in word as well as in deed. But what has significantly happened in the last 2 decades is China more or less is observing the basic law in word. And most of the time in word, what one means by word is in a way in which it determines as to what is a word all about. But when it comes to the spirit of the basic law, there is a significant amount of rupture. There is a significant amount of going against the spirit of what the basic law in 1997 was proposed and was all about. One of the other big reasons why one has to take the basic law into consideration is China intends to use the absorption of Hong Kong into Chinese sovereignty as a model by which China intends to absorb Taiwan into its larger framework of sovereignty. So the Chinese have right from day one sort of been insistent on this, that they want to see the basic law system succeed, because that's the sort of bait which they have been holding out as far as the Taiwanese are concerned, that well, they can very well be part of a single country, but nevertheless they can have a different system of governance, of freedoms, of practically doing things as far as polity, economy and society are concerned differently from the way in which things are done in mainland China. Having had said all of this, what sets the present round into the present round of protest, it sort of sends it out. And these types of protests have been happening since 1997. So once Hong Kong was absorbed into China as part of the single country, two systems pattern, you do have protests which have been regularly happening. So you do have protests in 1999, you do have protests in 2003, you do have them in 2010, you have protests in 2014, 15, 16. So practically there has hardly been a year when you just never had things being protested against. It seems that for all their material mindedness, Hong Kongers are a people who are pretty worried about the way in which China intends to enforce the basic law, most of the time in word, but hardly ever in spirit. Okay, so having had put that as some sort of a basic premise, some sort of basic framework in place, one needs to take a look at what brought these protests out. These are significant for a very simple reason, because in sheer numbers, Hong Kong has never seen anything like this. In a territory made of 7.5 million people, you have almost 2 million people out on the streets. 2 million people out on the streets and protesting all across the place. In cases on certain weekends, the numbers have been fairly higher than that. That's enough for the Hong Kong administration to sit up, take note, and acknowledge the fact that possibly things have gone very, very wrong. Well, the story starts as most such stories start, with a sin. So at the beginning is a sin. The sin happened in February 2018 when a young Hong Kong couple, Miss Poon and her boyfriend, Mr. Chan, went to Taiwan to celebrate Valentine's Day. Ms. Poon had been pregnant, as the autopsy report conducted after death revealed that she had been pregnant for almost 4 to 5 months. And they had been in this relationship for quite some period of time. It's Valentine's Day. It's February 2018. It's a Hong Kong couple, a young Hong Kong couple in their late tweens. So she is 20, he is 19. Who are out on a holiday in Taiwan, celebrating themselves, and things go wrong at some point of time. So, according to what has been revealed as far as police investigations and the media is concerned, is the two of them have a fight, pretty nasty and a bad fight, in which secrets stumble, and you have bruised egos, you have masculinity which has been badly hurt on being told that the child that the girlfriend is carrying is not his but of somebody else that she has been around with for some period of time. And all of this finally culminates in a moment of rage, which ends up with Mr. Chan killing Miss Poon. After which he stashes her body in a suitcase and throws off the suitcase in a thicket of trees and leaves the territory and comes back to Hong Kong. As the girl's family in Hong Kong starts making inquiries about where she has been, and as I find most of the answers that he's giving to be very evasive, they decide to take things to the next level and approach the police. It's at the police investigation level that Mr. Chan finally reveals that he has killed his girlfriend and he has disposed of her body by throwing it up in a thicket of trees at some railway station in Taipei. Now, on the face of it, it's a simple crime, a crime of passion which has been committed. But nevertheless, the one problem with the crime is it has happened on Taiwanese territory. And the problem with Taiwan that the Chinese have is the Chinese claim Taiwan, and Taiwan tries to do everything possible to resist any claim to its territory made by the Chinese in a fit of sovereignty. The Taiwan police seek the extradition of Mr. Chan so that he could be tried and he could be investigated in Taiwan for the crime which has been committed in Taiwan. The one small problem is Taiwan has no extradition treaty with Hong Kong. For the matter of fact, Hong Kong has no extradition treaty with either Taiwan or with Macau or with mainland China. Carrie Lam, the present chief executive of the Hong Kong SAR, decides that things need to be remedied. And using the pretext of these frantic letters, extremely passionate and deeply worrying, which have been written by the girl's parents to her, she decides to take matters into her own hand and to draft a bill of extradition whereby people who have committed crimes in jurisdictions with which Hong Kong doesn't have any extradition relationships, a bill would be piloted through the Hong Kong Legislative Council, which would at the end of the day see to it that people would be extradited to the territories where they have gone about committing the crimes. One of the territories that she puts in as far as this bill is concerned is the Chinese mainland, the People's Republic of China. Hong Kongers don't have much of a problem as far as this bill is concerned when it comes to Taiwan, when it comes to Macau. But Hong Kongers definitely have a lot of problem when it comes to the People's Republic of China. Well, had the bill been passed, it would almost have had, in a certain indirect way, been used by Beijing to enforce and to drum up the fact that Taiwan is part of China, and Taiwan is, for that matter of fact, not a separate territory or not a separate country, something that Taiwan is insistent on and something that the Chinese are deeply opposed to. Realizing as to what is the game that is afoot, the Taiwanese authorities finally decide that even if the bill gets passed, they're not going to press for Mr. Chan's extradition, and they're going to let matters rest where they are, letting the Hong Kong police carry on with their investigation and carry on with the cases at their end. Taiwan becomes very categorical about this fact that Taiwan is not at all going to press for the extradition of any person who has committed a crime from in Taiwanese territory and has moved on to Hong Kong, for a simple reason, because in the larger frame of things, this almost entails a certain assertion of Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan. But then you have this very interesting development as far as the Chinese leadership is concerned, that has been playing this game since 1997 in some form or the other. It has been trying to tighten the screws, sort of put the nuts and bolts in place as far as Hong Kong is concerned, for a simple reason, because the sort of freedoms that most Hong Kongers enjoy are the envy of most people in the PRC, but are also a certain sort of a problem as far as the Communist Party is concerned. The Communist Party governing China is concerned. For a simple reason, because under most of these freedoms, the party feels that its absolute control over power, if not significantly challenged, is at least questioned. And this is something that a party with the sort of tendencies that the Communist Party of China has is definitely too galling, and something that calls in for a remedy. So you have, they're not content with what has been going for all these last 2 decades. So significantly, they have kept on eroding the spirit of the basic law, in seeing to it that in tightly enforcing the law in word, the spirit of the law should be taken away. So you have in 17, this bridge that is inaugurated between China, mainland China, the city of Zhuhai, Macau and Hong Kong, which is purportedly supposed to be the world's longest bridge, an engineering marvel all by itself, given the fact that it goes about connecting 3 territories across the Pearl River estuary. But nevertheless, for most Hong Kongers, this bridge, more than an achievement, is an effort made by the Communist Party and its rulers in Beijing to further enforce control over the territory. But most of the time, the Hong Kong legislature for the last 20 years has been dominated by parties, individuals and formations who have been pro-Beijing and who have not created much of trouble, much of concern as far as Beijing is concerned. Most chief executives have been people who have come from the business community, who are, as Carrie Lam, the present chief executive, is from the Hong Kong bureaucracy, and are more or less people that the business communities are in thrall of or are more or less satisfied with. So all in all, they don't have much to complain. But as far as this round of protests is concerned, it were Hong Kong businesses which were in the forefront of asserting themselves and of almost hitting the streets with an idea which says that if the extradition bill holds, it also becomes a major problem as far as Hong Kong businesses are concerned. So it becomes a troublesome sort of a situation as far as practically everybody all across the place is concerned, and sort of demands that something needs to be done about it to set it right. On one hand are these problems between the Chinese and the United States as far as trade and commerce are concerned. You have a certain sort of security situation which is spiraling out of control in the East Pacific region, with a certain assertion, a certain sort of nationalist assertion as far as Japan and Korea are concerned. And on top of this, you have this problem which has been getting out of control as far as Hong Kong itself is concerned. So all in all, it was bad timing in terms of pushing for this bill. It was an effort being made by the Beijing authorities to sort of further tighten their control over the territory and to almost underscore the fact that they are the bosses. Unfortunately enough, the month of June happens to be the month when Hong Kong commemorates Tiananmen affair, the Tiananmen Square massacres, something which is not even talked about or referred to in other parts of China, but something which is massively commemorated in Hong Kong. And this bill gets a push from the government almost at the same time as far as the legislature is concerned. Carrie Lam almost made it a point of prestige that she has got to get this through. Most Hong Kong bureaucrats, members of the Legislative Council, members of government, do try to work in a way wherein the whole idea is they're trying to impress Beijing with their achievements. But most of the time, if things go wrong, as they have gone wrong in this case, Beijing's instincts are to wash off their hands with people like these and to sort of assert itself in a different way altogether. So this happens to be, as a scene in Hong Kong, the first major sort of reversal as far as the Xi government in Beijing is concerned, wherein as far as Chinese territory is concerned, on account of a major sort of distress and demonstration by a section of the Chinese population, the Chinese government has had to withdraw something that it was keen on getting passed in the first place. The extradition definitely would have targeted people who have committed crimes. Carrie Lam did keep on insisting for quite some period of time that it has no political motive, political dissent won't be penalized, and people who have been dissidents won't be extradited to China. But nevertheless, there was hardly anybody who was ready to buy that line of argument. So for most of them, it was clear that though they're talking about hardcore criminals and they're talking about what verifiably are crimes of sort of homicide that Mr. Chan committed in Taipei, nevertheless, the bill would definitely have been used against people who have committed murkier financial crimes, and after some period of time, definitely maybe against political dissent. So in that sort of situation, Hong Kongers were not very wrong in terms of trying to be too cautious about this and not letting the Chinese government any way as far as this bill is concerned. Their demand is that it shouldn't just be suspended, it should be withdrawn for all times to come, and there should be no talk of extraditing anybody to the Chinese mainland. For a country that is deeply obsessed, especially for a party and a government that is deeply obsessed in terms of focusing on a certain idea of power and in terms of projecting a certain idea of power, this is absolutely major reversal. Pretty critical for a very simple reason, because a couple of months from now, the Communist Party would be celebrating 100 years of its coming into existence. So in 2021, it would be 100 years that the party has come into existence. And it did plan a major bash around the period. But then with these types of things developing in a territory which is claimed by the party to be its sovereign territory, it does seem that a different narrative is certainly possible, and that's the sort of narrative that is now getting pushed for. So in this sort of a situation wherein certain sort of hegemony is projected, is asserted by authoritarian males of the Xi variety through a wide variety of political ideologies, it's quite refreshing to see 2 million people in a population of 7.5 million walk out and assert themselves in an equally strong way to insist on this, that these types of things will have no pass. Possibly therein lies the hope for Project Liberal Democracy. In a world wherein it seems that the project has run into quite a lot of rough weather in the past couple of months. And that's something that needs to be watched out for. One really needs to watch out for as to how would this game play out. Carrie Lam has sincerely apologized for the fact that she did try to push for this bill in a situation where it possibly commanded no respect and it commanded no support. It possibly also is time for both China and Hong Kong to reflect on the sort of freedoms that are enjoyed by the Legislative Council and to move towards what most Hong Kongers over the last decade had been arguing for, a real democracy, wherein their voices can be represented, can be heard, and can be heeded. Of course, we're almost halfway down the line as far as 2047 is concerned. So in something like 2 decades from now, 2047 becomes a reality and the basic law lapses. But nevertheless, till then, Hong Kong would definitely, if the present mood is something to go by, not give up on these tiny freedoms that it does enjoy legally, but at the same time, the Chinese are insistent on withdrawing them in as interesting ways as is possible. Thank you.
Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update from the Unique Academy. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned.